I know you can't see my face right now, but I am Marian Arake. I'm part of Allraise and I lead digital events here. So excited to see some familiar names on the call. And as many of you may know, we are a nonprofit dedicated to amplifying female voices and accelerating female success and creating a tech culture where women are leading, shaping, and funding the future. And we're very blessed and lucky to have a very strong partnerships and sponsors who help us do that. And so here are some of our founding partners. So thank you for all of our volunteers and partners who help us make these events and everything that we do possible. Again, before we get started, I want to go over a few housekeeping items. As you all know, from maybe being on webinars, we have a chat box, so please use the chat box to introduce yourselves. There's also a Q&A box down in the corner. Please use that Q&A box to put in all your questions. There will be a recording of the webinar for you all to access, which will be available on our website 24 hours after today. And so with that being said, I will stop sharing my screen. So hello. Welcome, Kim. Welcome, Helen. And I will be introing Kim today. So for all of you, Kimberly lives in the intersection of investing and technology. She's passionate about identifying innovative founders and equipping them with resources they need to scale thriving ventures. She's currently serving resilient founders at launch with Goldman Sachs, a $500 million investment strategy to increase access to capital and facilitate an ecosystem for diverse entrepreneurs. Before Goldman Sachs, she served on a management, corporate development, growth, and strategy roles within media, innovation, and technology sectors at EY and various social sector organizations. Kimberly has earned her MBA from Harvard Business School, where she focused on finance, technology, and general management. She earned her bachelor's degree in accounting from the University of Connecticut. So without further ado, Kim and Helen.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the November edition of Allraise's Founder Playbook series. Like Marian said, my name is Kimberly Foster, part of the Launch with GS team. Goldman's $500 million investing strategy grounds on our belief that diverse teams outperform, AKA, and I know we all can agree about this on this call, investing in Black, Latinx, and female founders is just good business, and it makes good business sense. So today, I have the pleasure of spending time with one of my favorite founders, Helen Adeosun, who's the co-founder and CEO of CareAcademy. Hi, Helen. How are you doing?
Hi, Kim. How's it going?
Good. Staying safe and sane during this eventful week?
Yeah, it's been, it's still going.
Still going.
It's still going, and we're still here. So
the world is still spinning, surprisingly. Yeah. But we're gonna try to stay present and be present, put away our Instagram and our Twitter and stop doom scrolling for just the hour, because we have a really interesting discussion today about navigating a Series A fundraising coming up. And Helen is not new to this topic. She recently closed a $9.5 million Series A round led by Impact America Fund back in June. So she's clearly one of the best to ever do it. And I'm just so excited. She's being modest, y'all. She's one of the best to ever do it. So excited to learn from her, interact from her today, and she's going to drop a ton of gems. So please get your pen and paper ready. But before we dive into the nuts and the bolts of pitch decks and data rooms and valuations and just generating investor FOMO, I'm personally a big fan of learning about you, Helen, the person. So how did Helen, fellow first-generation American, TFA alumna, ed school grad from Harvard, become a startup founder?
Yeah, sometimes I wonder that myself. And so, I think if anything, there's this underlying sense of stepping out on faith and just doing things and experimenting and just maybe, I never say that there's, I'm not afraid to fail. Of course I'm afraid to fail, but I think it's running scared a little bit. And so I've had just so many pivots and turns in my career. And I think it's even Sarah Blakely that talks about her dad sitting her down, the founder of Spanx, talking about wonderful female entrepreneur, talking about just, learning, right? And so many different failures that brought her to the point of just not being afraid and stepping out and, founding Spanx. And I think that is the biggest thing that any entrepreneur needs to arm themselves with. Like, there are, of course, points where you be scared, but it's the idea of running scared, right? And I've done that in a couple ways. I started out as a teacher, as a high school teacher at 23 and 24, and so much of that was like learning how to communicate with 14-year-olds. And I always say I learned so much from my kids than I think I taught them. I taught them. But I think it also lets you realize just the challenge and the fun of doing different things when there is so much at stake. And I don't think even within CareAcademy, I mean, there's a lot at stake here for us, but that was my first career. My first job out of college was, so much at stake for 300 kids a year, right? And so I think that was sort of the bedrock for me, learning how to do different things and being very comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I think that's part and parcel. If you're not uncomfortable in your journey as an entrepreneur and come with that entrepreneurial mindset, then you really, and have fun with it, right? Eventually smile and keep it moving. Then this is, it's hard to do. So I think every person who's joining us today exhibits some part of that, and that's why they're here. So, yeah.
That's fantastic. I know I personally have a Post-it note that a mentor of mine told me that for this quote, but the quote is, "Discomfort encourages growth." And I always think of, right? So I always think about that when I'm like just navigating my own career or thinking through just different opportunities. Doesn't make me uncomfortable? Am I uncomfortable thinking about the possibility of doing it? If it's a yes, we got to do it. It's going to be a little miserable. It's going to be a little scary, but at the end of it, it's going just to create this amazing opportunity. So when you said uncomfortable, that just resonated with me personally.
Absolutely.
So just pivoting gears a little bit but what led you to launch CareAcademy?
Yeah, I feel like, I'm always growing within CareAcademy. I think that's also part of our longevity, is that I imagine a world that we haven't accomplished yet. And so part of, it's worth mentioning, so I'm a 4th generation female entrepreneur. I didn't know that at the time. I thought I'd be an educator or whatever that looked like. But CareAcademy is actually a confluence of a lot of things that I care deeply about. I care deeply about women's issues. I care deeply about creating opportunities for people. No matter at what stage of my life that I've been in, I've always cared about education as a point of leverage for creating opportunities. And I, when I came to Boston for grad school, I always imagined that a perfect opportunity in my next job would put me at the intersection of all of those things, right? Like creating good policies for people who are working, for women of color, for immigrants, and then also using education as a point of leverage. I had been a care worker myself. I've been a direct care worker. And I believe, it is my foremost belief, that we underutilize the capacity of people. And we have so much work to do as a nation, as a world, to really help people attain their fullest capacity. And I think that's what education is all about, helping people meet the utmost of their capacity and unrealized potential. And that's what CareAcademy is actually in the business of, right? And so we're really fortunate in that people pay us to help people realize that. And it's a real business that we've created, and a meaningful one, and one of the fastest growing industries in the world. But the opportunity, I think, is what really led me to create CareAcademy, right? And the curiosity around, what if we could imagine a world where direct care workers and people who are doing the work that felt like healthcare work were actually recognized for doing some of the most meaningful work within healthcare? And how do we help leverage their capacity? How do we help them build capacity to be able to make a meaningful difference within healthcare, right? Imagine what communities would look like, especially women-led families where someone is the primary breadwinner and is a direct care worker. Imagine what our healthcare system would look like if people maintained their dignity within their homes and had great health care within their communities that kept them connected to their communities, right? We're not alone right now in this moment of COVID, right, which is created and really upended the way we thought about healthcare, and is really raising the profile of companies who have a mission of community-based healthcare and impact. And so we're really fortunate in that regard, but that's really what started the outlook of CareAcademy. The world that we imagine doesn't exist in the way that we want it to that we envision it, and so we're creating it and we're shaping it.
Got it. So you have this outlook and this vision for the world, and back, in the early 2010s, how did you come up with the initial prototype?
It was a lot of, and I think every person on this call can probably relate to that. I did a lot. I joke often within CareAcademy that there's no job, even if I did it poorly, that I have not done at all. And I think that as an entrepreneur, that is how you learn. So whether it was, we started off with some basic levels of content, and just really understanding, if we put content out there, would people consume it? Do people have a desire to learn about caregiving skills? And do people have a desire to pay for it, right? Because we're running a business. And so the initial content, we created, and by renting out Airbnbs and actors, and in sometimes stepping out and doing that myself, and editing some of that content, right? I don't know anything about video editing to this day. I would never step out and do video editing. We have someone who does that within the company, but doing a lot of the initial stuff just to get out something that I was very embarrassed about, and it was very ugly, but it worked, right? And that is what, with the whole rise in the last 10 years of developing out the MVP, and developing out the initial concept, like doing that yourself as the entrepreneur is how you really meaningfully learn how to do the things that don't scale, right? Paul Graham says that all the time, and then getting to a point of scale. But yeah, filmed, edited, rented out Airbnbs, hired actors, learned about hiring actors.
The whole film crew.
The whole film crew, wrote scripts, hired, folks who were experts really in terms of the profession of caregiving to offer insights. But it was a whole thing. A lot of fun though.
That's amazing. And it seems like you wore all of the hats possible in those early stages. And I'm assuming one of those hats was a fundraiser.
Yeah.
At what point in the early stages of CareAcademy did you think that it was the right time to bring in outside capital?
Yeah, I bootstrapped for a lot of time, the longest time outside of grad school. So I think even from a period of, I had a job, I had a full-time job, I was sort of learning and playing around the edges of what would become CareAcademy for a good couple years before I was really able to kind of step out and offer it as a product and really kind of, take it on. But even in those early stages, I was really fortunate in that our very first angel investor, so I think most folks will either you bootstrap, you develop something, you talk about the thing that you're developing, and then you can get angel investors. And so in Boston, I was as I was developing this thing and really sort of hanging out with people. One of the things that I learned how to do, or a talent and a skill that I developed as a result of working with folks who were formerly from the Obama campaign, was around storytelling. And what I say all the time to entrepreneurs and budding entrepreneurs is that your first currency is storytelling, right? Is narrative making, because that is the thing that will carry you forward. I am the chief storyteller on behalf of CareAcademy, talking about the world that we imagine and the fact that we're here to build it. But that currency is also the thing that gets you your first investors and all the other stakeholders that will invest in your company, whether it's, your initial employees or the contractors. And so I learned, and I'm always still learning how to tell that story better and how to shape that story depending on who we want to bring in. So for the first couple of years, bootstrapped and really sort of believed in this idea that we could put forth content that people would want to consume. And then as we started, trying to figure out the business model, went to early, they call them the friends, family, and fools. I love our angels to this day, but I had nothing, right? I really, other than the content and just the sheer grit, didn't really have a whole lot, but folks who were willing to write the initial $5,000 check, right? So that we could get some sort of piece of content and iterate on that and prove that out. And then you develop out, and I'm always happy to talk about that motion of how you go from sort of angel investment to that seed stage investment, and then the expectations of each one, including up to Series A as well.
So let's talk about that. I love the movement from the FFF, the Friends, Family, and Fools, to the seed to the Series A. But when you're thinking about your seed round, or just like the early checks, there's a lot of back and forth from the investor community and the founder community about, pitch competitions, accelerators, or just an infusion of cash. I guess, what route did you ultimately go? And then what were the pros and cons of that decision?
Yeah, the exhausting one, right? And I think that's, I'm going to be very real. And I think, one of the things that I've said whenever I give, the discussion around my foundership journey is it's to whatever extent possible, it's the good, the bad, and the ugly. So because I want to dispel the mythology that we build around entrepreneurship, right? So I think as women, and especially as a woman of color, the barriers are definitely still there. The biases are implicit by every measure in terms of having access to capital. So I just want to just even lay that out there. And so my route was a lot of I have to figure out ways to be seen, and I have to do as much and be very, frugal whenever possible and smart whenever possible in terms of the little capital that I have in order to yield high return, right? I think women have to make that decision in terms of, we know overall, in fact, that the investment levels in 2020 have reverted back, according to some folks, to 2017 levels, have to be very smart in terms of capital. And so I would literally say, with every customer interaction, with every potential, accelerator, what's the ROI? I do that to this day, even in terms of our customer relationships, but I have to go, okay, we're going to do this potential accelerator. I'll say them because they've been extremely generous and great with us, with Google and their GFE accelerator. What I want the outcome to be out of this is that I could go there and I'm going to spend X amount of money, and if I get to the outcome, it'll look like this. So let me make sure, how do I hedge on getting to that outcome? So I want 20K and want to walk away with something like that. Like, how do we do that, right? And a lot of those decisions, and it's exhausting, right? Because you're not only talking about the movement of trying to find small pieces of capital, but you're also talking about building a business in order to be worthwhile of capital when you get to that point. So for I would even say from between 2014 and 2016, I had a list of potential investors and a list of customers and a list of non-dilutive opportunities that I was just hunting down and just treated like a pipeline in order to have those infusions of cash to be able to move to the next milestone. And so that's not atypical. That's, I think, part of a lot of folks, whether you're talking about someone, and I love to highlight other Black women who were, venture backed and are amazing and have been resources for me. Someone like Iman Abu Zaid, I think, has very similar points in her story that she'll tell you around doing those moments of trying to find capital and shake down the tree in order to get to the next milestone.
So you went through this exhaustive path and you ultimately closed the seed round of 1.7 million in 2017. So let's just think of a scenario. The money comes into your bank account, in 2017. It's all cleared, check clears. What do you do next at that point? Like, what is your next step after that check clears?
Yeah, let me tell you what I wish I had done and what I've done now after the moment, right? So I'll just be very blunt with everyone. By as a means of accepting capital, right? You're holding yourself to a certain set of KPIs, a certain set of metrics. And while that isn't the complete dictate, like I want us to be as entrepreneurs where, we're building what hasn't been built before, we're shooting for the stars. There's also the very hard reality of like those KPIs, right? And I actually attribute that to why, if we step out and look on the VC landscape, why it's really hard to do that seed to Series A motion is because there are things that are implicit in terms of doing that no one ever tells us, but we have to just figure out, right? I think, those, I actually have found it, again, I'll be very explicit. I wish I had gone to my white male peers like I did from seed to Series A and said, how did you do this? Because I have to figure out how and engineer a process to my success, and I have to figure out the milestones. I have to figure out the people that I have to have on my team. And we kind of stumbled around in the dark, I think, for a moment from seed to Series A a little bit, and then really kind of picked it up where I was like, oh, what I really need to figure out is how to get to that Series A. What are the milestones and the expectations around that? And how do I do this, right? And seek out those resources. And so what I did I'd like to be very tactical too, so bear with me. So what we did this time around is starting around September, October, I was in list building mode. Actually before that, in the summer of last year, was in list building mode, where I said, here are the most recent entrepreneurs in the Boston area who've raised a Series A. So I'm going to make a point to talk to as many of these folks and make friends with them, and they're going to walk me through their process. What does that look like? What is the motion of that? Because it's tacticianing, and I think we don't talk about it often enough, but in the very early days, it is a lot. We don't get to sit on strategy. It is tacticianing your way to really building something meaningful. So that is the thing that I wish I had done. I said, I'm not living for my Series A, but in the back of my mind, what are the things that I need to do in order to get there? What are the milestones for the company? And so as I'm getting towards there, I'm preparing and making that narrative known. So I caution folks to be very explicit, because once you take one check, you're also setting up the stage for other checks, right? So a Series A means that someday CareAcademy has to also raise a Series B. So what are the things that we need to do in between? And just keep it at the back of your mind in order to be generative, right? In order to plan. I don't know if that answers your question, Kimberly.
No, that's perfect. And I think the talking to other founders in the community is extremely helpful, because investors, like, yes, we may have some insights here, insights there, but I think the founders truly know what's up, and they will tell you the real deal about the investors in the community. So giving anybody who's in the predicament of going from seed to Series A, talking to folks who have done it before and done it well, is probably the best advice that you can get, for sure, which is why we're here today, right? You did it for Series A, and our individuals here today listening to you are going to learn the real deal. And then you said that you live in the tactical, and so do I. Mm-hmm. So let's get down to the nitty gritty of what a Series A raise actually looks like. Was there a metric as you were thinking about your Series A? Was there a metric that you hit where you were like, okay, now is the time for me to start fundraising? And then when you started doing that, what was the investor list like? Did you think about it as a wide net? Did you think about it as targeted investors that were in the healthcare field? What was the entire process for you from, yes, it's time to fundraise, to, okay, we're going to start making a list of potential investors in our pipeline?
Great question. I love these questions, Kimberly. This is amazing. So the first, step out of the gate was I try to keep it simple for myself, right? And so the conversation that I was having, and we purposely moved next door to our managing director from our Techstars class and an investor of ours, right? Because I mean, like, you can go knock on his door. Yeah, I probably bother him way too much, but I like, you know, he's one of those people who can like keep it very honest, right? He's like, look, the way Series A looks like right now, I remember having this conversation in 2018 or 2019. He's like, you've got to show out 1 to 2 million in ARR, and even that's not a guarantee, right? We have portfolio companies, they're at 2 million, you know, and he didn't talk quite about the quality of that revenue, but that's what it takes to raise a genuine Series A, and people will they'll get at least a guaranteed look at that, right? So in the back of my mind, I kept those two implicit measures of the ability to raise a Series A being at what rate can CareAcademy say we are on our way or we're at $1 million in ARR, and it's quality revenue, right? And so in our case, it's recurring SaaS B2B revenue. It's not a onesie twosie. It's very explicitly that. And that to me meant if we could show that we're reasonably on our way to doing that, and more importantly, we can build to the future beyond that. And we imagine for all of the other opportunities that are adjacent to that to not only grow net new customers, but then also wallet share of customers and all the other things that SaaS companies are just, we're a mission and impact driven company, but at the end of the day, y'all, we're a SaaS company, right? If we can measure for measure show that, then we're ready to raise. And then the other thing too is I still think the story for me was still halfway there. And the way to really get it investor ready was just doing the thing and going in front of investors. And so that gets to your next question, Kimberly, around putting together the investor list. So I advise everyone to think about their perfect syndicate, right? So investors are not just hard capital, they're human capital, they're social capital, you know, they're signaling capital. So if you had to have a really good mix of people who are able to not only put in the initial dollars, but get you over the finish line, and then also be your hidden, you know, weapon for getting new customers and thinking about your new customers and are just rolling up their sleeves and are there for you, how would you think about that syndicate, right? And that for us meant thinking about folks like IAF, who like just Keisha is and her team are just rock stars in terms of, you know, texting back and forth with me at like 2 a.m. and helping me strategize around a single customer, to folks who signal about what's next with CareAcademy and can help us get there. And so I put together a list that actually was cross-functional and cross-vertical. So it was, we want a healthcare investor. We want folks who are education-based, right? Because upskilling is so much of a part of our go-to-market and providing for a new means to upskill. We want, you know, traditional SaaS investor who can keep us honest about how we're doing and performing in that way. We want some folks who can help us signal forward as well and who have the ability, and there are different ways you can put together and imagine your syndicate, but folks who would have the resources just based on the life cycle of their funds to come in to a bridge or a Series B, right? And that it was just even that practical. So putting together there are some great blogs around how you approach thinking about that list, who has fresh powder in terms of fund sizes, who has portfolios that with companies made up of founders who look like you, in more ways than one, you know, hint, hint. And that was very, very obvious wink.
Very blonde hint.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So looking around that and putting together the perfect syndicate, and multiple types of investors, right? So if you're raising a Series A, you're not going to go talk to someone, you know, who is pre-seed to, you know, possibly seed, right? Like those folks kind of, even after I made the list, there are a couple of folks who may have said certain things, but looked a certain way and were comfortable at a certain stage. And so they naturally, I wouldn't even bother, right? In terms of the time and the opportunity cost to go reach out to them. And so that,
sorry to interrupt you. No. So like to that point just now about, you know, investors saying one thing, but if you look at the website, it's a completely different picture. You would talk to an investor, they would say, yeah, we write, Series A checks, but then you go to their website, their entire fund for the portfolio is like these small checks, right?
Or even, and this is something I did a lot of in terms of backgrounding. If I was really interested in an investor, like I make a lot of lists in this way, and I think of processes this way. I would go talk to the portfolio company, right? Because everyone is vying for the investor's time, but let me go get it straight from the horse's mouth, right? And the other thing too is that once you've made that list, communicating, I don't recommend folks, if you're really interested in someone, and remember, you're doing a road show to stress test the narrative. I started out with the bottom of the list. So if I wanted to get practice in, maybe I might talk to someone who was sort of Series A, but was just adjacent or learning about healthcare. I'd go out and stress test the narrative with them and make notes and iterate on that. So one of the tools that I recommend, other than Google Docs and keeping your Excel sheet in Google Docs, not Excel, do your investor list in Google Docs, is DocSend. One of my friends told me about the tool in lieu of his Series A raise, and I use that to iterate over time, especially for you like nerdy science folks out there. DocSend is a tool that allows for you to take that initial deck and iterate it over time and A/B test it literally, right? So if I notice that in our first version of our deck, which you don't hand out to everyone, but in that initial version of a deck, that people were interested in slide 8 versus slide 5, I'd front load slide 8 and just get to it in order to kind of make the case for the company. There's a whole stage. I actually really recommend Pillar VC. It's a firm that's based here in Boston that does an excellent job of doing the timeline of seed to Series A. I see Tammy Williams being like, please add that tool in the chat. And I'm trying to talk and like think, and I'll do that in a minute. But Pillar VC is excellent, and what they have on their site, and I love this. If I had a VC firm, I'd be like Pillar. And what they have is everything from a term sheet grader to a lot of resources that detail your timelining from seed to Series A. And so I was like, I wish 9 months in hindsight I'd seen that. I don't even know if they had it up there, but I think thank you so much, Alraise. But I think that's a wonderful place to start in terms of timelining.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So I get pitched a lot, and sometimes I'll hear this range of a number. So they'll say, I'm raising a Series A, I'm raising a Series B, and I ask what the amount is, and they'll say 10 to 15 million. And I think what you can do with 10 million and what you can do with 15 million are totally two different things. And if I push back, there's hesitation sometimes. But what I do love is when I hear people say, I can hire an entire marketing team, expand to Europe with $10 million. Mm-hmm. With $15 million, I can hire operations, marketing, go to China and go to Europe. Mm-hmm. How did you think about getting that core number down? Was it bottoms up? What was your process there?
Yeah, it was bottoms up and top down. So we stress tested that number. And just to really just divert, because she's a friend of mine, and I think it's a great question. Brianne Leeming just really quickly said, hi, the 1 to 2 million in ARR metric for Series A, is it actually bookings already in annually, or is it a run rate, i.e. projecting forward for the rest of the year? It's a run rate. And folks, that's, for us as a SaaS company, that's generally accepted. I know Brianne personally, and I know maybe her business may move differently, but for investors, they were looking, for our type of investors, are looking for repeatability, and so that ARR run rate was really crucial. And so I already forgot your question, Kimberly. I was trying not to.
Finding the number that you're going out to raise with. Yep. So
the number that you're going out to raise with, and here's the tactical piece that I advise. It took me a while to learn this, but here's the secret of that number. So you go in the back and really figure out the number with your CFO, right? If you, from seed to A, we still outsource to a wonderful CFO, outsource CFO called Expo. And over time that has to change, but they're wonderful. And they had done an excellent job of doing this for other folks, right, and preparing other people for Series A. So we came up with a number, and what I said to myself as a founder is, okay, I have this number, and this would enable us to develop out types of content, hire go-to-market, and some of the functions that we're missing within the team, X, Y, and Z. That number is not necessarily the number that you want to go out and state publicly yet, right? So I had that number in the back of my head, and I said, what I'm going to do internally is I'm going to add buffer to that. So let's say, for instance, that number that we came up with, it's not, but I'm going to give you an example, was 5 million. You'll add, 2 million onto that. So saying 7 million, right? And some people do that and double that overall, just in terms of giving themselves cushion. I did not double it per se. I did add on to that in terms of sort of the go-to-market motion. But then what we also knew that we're doing, and I want to mention it to folks, and give a shout out to SVB, is that on top of our equity raise, we also did a debt raise. So the 9.5 million was an equity, then we did an additional 3 million in a debt raise. So it's combined total about 12.5 in the Series A. I think before the last couple of years, it was atypical that you would see both of those deployed a little earlier, but I'm hearing even about seed stage investment opportunities where folks are doing a debt with an equity as well. So that was our buffer. So we didn't do that on the equity side, but we definitely did it on the debt side. So, reach out to SVB if you're interested in something like that. You have to do it alongside or pretty close to an equity raise too, in order to get the valuation and the amount for that. So the amount that we came up with added buffer to it, but what we publicly stated was probably about half that. The reason that you do that is that it's part of the FOMO process, and something that Techstars, I'll give them the attribution, talks a lot about soft circling, right? So if, we at the end of the day raise a 9.5 equity round, let's imagine that the initial number that we stated in terms of the raise was potentially 4 or 5, right? And what you're doing is you're trying to get to the grain of sand that builds the pearl around it. So putting out the number in order to get to a subscription amount that really moves the needle in terms of getting that mindset and getting people going, oh, wow. So not only is it filling up, but it's also filling up fast, right? And it's actually, I think from a mental standpoint, it was actually quite manageable for me to put the real number in the back of my mind and front face with the half number. It made it feel a lot. I'm a person who loves incrementalizing sometimes because it's just easy for you to wrap your head around that. So when we 50% oversubscribe, maybe the 4 to 6 million, then you move the bar out a little bit more, and then you move it out a little bit more. And Techstars has a belief in the soft circling, and a huge shout out to the book Venture Deals. The most recent edition came out at the end of last year, and they talk at length about this in Venture Deals. But by doing that, you build that FOMO, and true to form, Techstars believes that you will either not raise it, or you raise it too long, or you raise it in time and oversubscribe it. It is the means in which we have motioned our rounds and have oversubscribed every round that we've ever gone out to market for. So I just want to mention that and highlight that, right? If you have a number, don't go out and readily state that number. You're moving, you're not lying, right? But you're soft circling. And what you do is you're trying to get commitments to build up to the real number in order to kind of get energy towards your round.
And then just going back to the tactical, you have this list of investors. Are you reaching out cold, warm? Are you slipping through people's DMs on Twitter? And then when you do talk to them, are you, I know you mentioned, not giving your deck to everybody. How do you choose who gets the prize jewel? Yeah.
If you're familiar with sales, like I am, everything is a process, and I believe in process because it removes the emotion and for me, it removes the emotion and rejection of everything from there, right? And so a lot of behavioral economists talk about like the idea of like, for some folks, if it's all written out and if it's all mapped out, it's the comfort of, at least of something being sort of mapped out and driven by process, right? That kind of gets our mind wrapped around it and gets us moving to the goal line. So for me, part of the movement is thinking about it like a sales process. So the initial work that I did, and I pissed off my parents during Christmas break because I spent most of December looking for on LinkedIn the first, second, and third connections in order of priority of people who were in the portfolio, people who were adjacent or knew someone who was the investor, and then also making sure that I had the associate who understood the story and really the partner that I wanted to be in touch with. So making a list of, based on, I mean, you just got to do the research, going on the website for the VC, and then doing the work on LinkedIn of finding who was approximate and near and adjacent to those folks who could do the introduction. So based on that, I actually had a rank order of priority of not only the investors, but also the people that I wanted to introduce on my behalf. So making that list. And then once I finished that took a couple days of nonstop email writing and figuring that out in terms of the list. I then created sort of a subset standardized email and intro. I did a short intro and a long intro. And I said, hey, Jason, you know these folks at blah, blah, blah ventures. You know, I hope you're having a great Christmas break. When you get back, I'd love to have an intro to these folks, just so I make it easy for you. There's a short intro about all the reasons they should talk to us and why I think they should talk to us. So I did, again, further research. And I said, you know, I know that you guys believe in the future of work. I know you believe in the future of healthcare. You've spoken extensively about this, and here are our metrics. I'd love to get coffee, or I'd love to virtually visit, or whatever that is. Sent that to the introducing person, and now they have ammo to readily launch those introductions. So I actually, because it was Christmas break and I didn't want to look too crazy unless they were really good friends, I timed out those emails. So it was like hundreds of emails went out like the second week of January on behalf of CareAcademy. And so these wild intros were coming through. And what I would do is like around 6:30 every morning, maybe at least 3 days a week, would just write out and make the connections on my spreadsheet. So kind of where they were in pipeline, who had made the intro, who did I need to get back to? And then on Saturdays, just again, process. That's how I function in the world. I'm reaching out, I'm thanking people, I'm doing all the things that I need to do all in one fell swoop. And I'm reordering and reprioritizing where people are in pipeline. These are folks I'm going to focus on, the people with the term sheets. These are the people who can follow. That's my world that I live in, right? And just doing that, because again, it's about building process, doing that every single day, because it's a full-time job to raise, right? And doing that for a couple months.
That's great. I think Tammy has a really great question to the point of process. You know, in your syndicate, there's a lead, and then there's a bunch of follows.
Yeah.
How did you think about your lead, and how did you approach investors as a lead investor in your round?
Yeah, like knowing who actually leads, right? So I think that is also the tricky part of this too, is that there's a lot of assumption making of just investors, but what you're also doing when you're prioritizing your list of investors is you're saying who leads and who follows, like by natural order, right? And it's at some part of the conversation, you're asking that as well, right? Like, do you typically lead? And people are going to be very explicit about that. So I prioritized in between December and March our potential lead investors and meeting them out in person. But in the background, because I have the capacity for it, and because right now, you know, at the very top of the year, my job and my first priority as CEO of CareAcademy was fundraising on behalf of CareAcademy, was also making sure some of those follows were along for the ride, right? And the reason that I did that, I inadvertently learned during my seed fundraise, the need to kind of get your lead investors and make sure that you're coalescing your folks who follow on, so that once something is shaped up, they rapidly come on and then it just falls into place, right? That's the motion that you want to get. So we're giving just enough to our existing investors and other investors who are interested as follows, and then also talking to enough lead investors who may potentially want to put out a term sheet. And so by March, when we signed with IAF, we already had the round roughly about 60 to 75% committed, because we've been talking to folks who were generative, and we're just basically waiting for the term sheet as a means of an expressed interest in making the round come together.
Gotcha. So I know when you're fundraising, you have those soft commits for those follow-ons. People typically ask, do you have a lead? Do you have a lead? Do you have a lead? And when you don't have a lead, how can you make sure that follow-on investor who soft commits is actually committed, so that when, in your case, IAF says yes, they're actually going to wire their check in a couple of weeks or however long it takes, versus, yeah, we want to do it, but then they never actually do it,
Well, I'm going to hate the answer that I'm going to give you. You can't. That's why it's a soft commitment, right? You can't, right? All of the gesturing and the FOMO and all of these other things are just shots in the wind. I mean, I don't want to give the process too much credence, because a soft commitment is exactly that. No one has to come along. And there are investors who were gung-ho from the very start. If you'd asked me all of my life savings that they would be part of our round, I've been like, absolutely. And when we got to where we got to, whether because of, the mechanics of the deal or whatever else, or, in COVID, capital calls were a very real thing. In the very height of COVID, when things started really kind of happening, just didn't come in or couldn't participate, right? And so you don't, which is why, from a mindset perspective, you want to oversubscribe the round with soft commitments, right? It is saying, okay, I am raising and trying to circle 9.5, but my list for 9.5 wasn't 9.5 at the end of the day. It was actually much more than that, right, of soft commit. But you're still talking to people. And the only way you generate that movement is always talking to people. So there were days, every 2 or 3 days or so, I was sending out, I made them part of our general marketing list. So they saw that it's not Helen who's like desperately looking for you. We're doing stuff. We're operating as a company still, right? We're in the midst, we're made for this moment, was the narrative that I came out with in March, and said, CareAcademy is exactly born for this moment. And if anything, you should be part of our fundraising round, because we're going to come out on top at the end of this on behalf of our customers in this industry, right? And so everything that we're doing, so if we're doing webinars, I send that to all the follow, they don't even know it, but I send that to the entire follow list, because they were like, wow, this company is really operationalizing, and here's the capacity of this company. So you don't have to do it necessarily through direct emails. In fact, I suggest you don't. Make them part of the marketing list, make them part of the general update list, right? So they see the activity of the company, because at the end of the day, investors are human. And so they're taking all of that as motion of your ability to execute as a CEO. So, and as people are asking you, do you have a lead? Do you have a lead? It's coming. And I think the ways you say that is we're talking to folks right now. We've got great prospects, but if you're genuinely interested in this, right, this is the way that you head off that lead conversation, is the soft circling process, right? If soft circling, and again, I say go out and Google it, read about it, whatever you need to do. But for me to come to you as either a follower or a lead and say, as a lead, the narrative is, if you led and we went down this path, I already have 70% of what I need. And so you'd only have to fill in 30%. So let's figure out how to if you're really convicted around the company, let's figure out a way for you to do this, so you're part of something that's moving already. All I have to do is find the lead, right? If you're a follow, it's saying, oh crap, if a lead comes in right now and these other people have soft committed into the round, I got to get in where I fit in, right? So the soft commitment is meant to build the impetus around either the lead or the follow. It doesn't matter who that is. It's just different types of conversations, right, around the movement generally of the round. And that gets you away from do you have a lead? Do you have a lead? All you need to know is I've got a round, it's for this much, and I already have like 80% of it soft committed. Are you going to get in? Yeah.
So it goes back to the framing storytelling element.
That's right.
Got it. So we have a question from the audience. Holly, going back to your point of the incremental sell, of having a number in the back of your head, but saying another number. How can you actually change that number from investors? Her point is, won't investors have already committed be a little bit uneasy or upset because they, in their mind, have a certain ownership amount in their head?
Yeah, they do, and that's a really good question, right? And so the way that we did that, it wasn't so far off, right? So I didn't say at any point we're only raising $1 million, and that's what it, because they do have ownership stake, right? And that also fits into the moment, but they're used to, the world of investment acts around a thesis of, is something moving and how do we become a part of it, right? And so no one's gonna be mad at you for oversubscribing a round if people are genuinely interested in the company, right? It only proves them more right? And the hunch more right. So the way that we did that is, I'd say, okay, potential follow-on investor, we're raising right now, it looks like, I'll call it, 5 or 6, and it looks like we're 40% of the way there, right? And it looks like there's energy here. So I'm just going to raise this, and we definitely can make a case for why we need the capital, but I'm going to call this 7 or 8 million, right? And I'll come back next week and I'll ask you until you give me your commitment, but I'm going to go talk to these other folks as well. I'm not going to tell you who I'm talking to, but I'm talking with other folks. And then I come back and say, oh my gosh, investor, like we're 75%, Holly, we're 75% of the way of the 8 million that I just talked to you about last week, right? I suspect that there's a tolerance for us maybe even having more capital, and folks will also come to you and they'll tell you, like, it's not even what you state, it's also what they do, right? Because their ownership stake is also driven by check size. And so they'll say, for us, we want we target a certain ownership stake. We typically write check sizes of this size. And you'll also have to do that math in your head before approaching that investor, right? And so if you're raising, $10 or $15 million round, like, and you have someone who's writing a minimum $3 million check size, if you only have reasonably about $1 million left, like there's very little likelihood they want to be part of your round. So it's doing also the math that's why that documenting is so key. Because we had folks at the end of our round who would have been great investors and we're definitely targeting for a Series B, who raised the fund and the timing was incorrect in that I didn't have enough room left in our sort of target from a valuation, from a retention of in terms of dilution and equity and all that other stuff, and our close date, right, in terms of where they started out and their check size. So the timing was off. They finished their fund. They were deploying $3 million checks, and we only have about $1 million left in terms of the round. And you'll encounter that, right? And that's great for next time if they do sort of next rounds of whatever you're at. But it is what it is. But I did not encounter that many people, and I would have known already if they don't write of that size or don't participate at that level or that valuation, because you're always in constant communication with these folks, which is why, again, like, raising is a full-time job. You are having all these informal conversations where you're sussing out information about where people really are, and they're trying to suss out where you really are too, right? So, yeah.
It's all a dance. So I know we're almost at time. I have one last question for you, and it's multi-pronged. What is next for Helen? What is next for CareAcademy? And what do you hope for the ecosystem of founders, of women, Black, Latinx founders in the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, I just even to point at Kamal, because I'm trying to be as helpful as possible before we run out of time. I didn't tell people any terms. She asked what terms do you follow on before you have a lead. We're letting the market decide. I led and did that walk and dance throughout the entire time. And then we came together in terms of a term sheet to do the terms. what I imagine for CareAcademy is that we are the company that completely reimagines, the education and the standing of direct care workers, right? I think in this moment of COVID, we are hyper-focused around the technology that surrounds healthcare, but no one is really having a conversation about how you optimize people for healthcare. And I believe more than any other segment or sector, I'm very highly biased that healthcare and healthcare work is the future of work, right? It is human-oriented work to help other humans. And so we are going to be the company that completely transforms the landscape, that measures the impact of direct care workers and elevates direct care workers into transformative, healthcare, healthcare extenders. So what's next for us is that we're right now in the background, and I'm really excited. We're working our butts off to figure out all the means and the ways that we can do that and take our own work even to the next level. It's not enough to provide the education, but it's really measuring the impact of that education and creating opportunities for those who are getting that education. And we have our hands in a couple things, and I'm trying to grow the business, right? And so how do we build a $1 billion business around that very premise is something that I'm excited about, and we're working towards. So yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Helen. Thank you, Always. Thank you, everybody in the audience today. I know I took a ton of notes, so thank you so much. This was fantastic.
Thank you, guys.
This
is so much fun.
Thank you. And to everyone on the line, this will be recorded and posted on the Always website, along with resources that Helen had mentioned earlier. And I know there's also a deck that you're sharing with us. So really, really love all the gems. I learned a lot as well. So thank you again to you both and everyone on the call, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.